Tonight on the All Kinds of Weather Forecast, we preview the showdown in the swamp. The number 19 Miami Hurricanes head in to play the Florida Gators. We preview the matchup and what we think is going to happen this Saturday. This is in All Kinds of Weather Forecast. And welcome in to another episode of In All Kinds of Weather Forecast. I'm your host, Chris Yanes, alongside my co-host, Neil Schulman, and we are excited because it is finally game week. We are previewing the showdown tonight. We're going to get into all the storylines, the key players for each team, who has the advantage on both sides of the ball, and we're going to give our keys to the game. But before we get to all that, make sure if you're watching on YouTube to hit that subscribe button down below, like this show, leave a comment, leave your prediction of what you think is going to happen this Saturday in the swamp. Do you think the Gators come out with an upset victory over the 19 Miami Hurricanes, or do you think the Gators go to 0-1 for the second year in a row? And if you're listening on audio formats, please leave us a 5-star review. It helps us reach all of Gator Nation with more great content. And before we go any further, the In All Kinds of Weather Forecast is proudly sponsored by 401k Generation, the wealth management company that helps you invest today for your future tomorrow. Their team of advisors is committed to providing guidance and education for your 401k plan and its participants. And they also offer a range of enrollment solutions tailored to meet the unique needs of your company's 401k plan. Whether it's savings for your child's college, investment advice, or even your retirement, 401k Generation's team of advisors makes getting to know you their top priority. Their advisors will tailor a path to assist you in navigating life's financial milestones and reaching your financial goals. 401k Generation, building stronger futures, one generation at a time. For more information, contact them at 866-998-5879 or visit their website at 401kgeneration.com. It's game week, Gator Nation. It is finally game week. The showdown that everybody has been talking about. All of the talk going into this offseason, the Florida Gators, the Vegas favorite to be over under at 4.5 wins, and an underdog going into their season opener for the second year in a row. The Florida Gators take on the Miami Hurricanes in a matchup that could define their season. Will they be able to pull out a win? Can the Gators extend an NCAA best 34-game home opener winning streak dating all the way back to 1989 when the Gators lost to Ole Miss 24-19? We're going to put it all on the line this Saturday, but I think everybody knows what the big storylines are here. You've got Mario Cristobal, 12-13 as a head coach. Billy Napier, only one game worse, 11-14 as a coach. The showdown of epic proportions. They've gone on the recruiting trail. They've fought for the same recruits. Both have come away with wins on that front. But today, on this Saturday, they put it all on the line. And we're going to see what happens in the swamp. But I think, Neil, the best place to start is, what do you think both fan bases' perspectives are heading into this game? Because I think on one hand, you look at the Gator fans, and I think they're very anxious. That was my word that I described in the State of the Program address, that I think the fan base is anxious heading into this game. They just really want to see what they have in Billy Napier in year 3, now that he's got his roster in there. And then I think on the Miami side, it's, can they become that college football playoff contender that a lot of media prognosticators out there, as we all saw this past week, are picking to not only win the ACC, but make some noise in the college football playoff?
Well, I think on the Miami side, it's a bit simpler. They don't have a big fan base, first of all, but of their fan base, I think that there is a portion of it that'll do the FSU post Orange Bowl thing, or even the FSU post Georgia Tech thing, where if they don't like the result of something, they'll just pretend it didn't happen. And they'll say, well, we can win the next 11 games. We'll be in the college football playoff. It doesn't matter. Like they did in 2019. They were talking up until they lost to FIU on the grounds of the old Orange Bowl at Marlins Park. They were talking, well, we could still beat the Gators in a rematch in the Orange Bowl. We'll beat them there. They'll just be in denial because they can be, because they're in the ACC, because we don't have to face off against them again. And no SEC team is going to face off against them again. They have that benefit of a fairly easy schedule. I think the majority of the fan base, though, Probably I'd say like a 75-25 split. The 75% that are going to choose to tether themselves to reality are probably going to say, well, this is what we are afraid of. Mario Cristobal can get the big talent. He can't win with it. We're stuck. We're screwed because, and if you look at his contract, it's an even bigger poison pill to fire him than Napier's is at Florida, which, is going to have to be a point of conversation at some point fairly soon in this show. But they're not going to fire him this year because they can't. They can't afford it. They don't want to admit that they were wrong on such a massive swing to fire Manny Diaz to go and then get the guy from Oregon. So they're going to say, well, this might just be where we are. I think that's a pretty fair fair congruence that's going to exist across the spectrum of Miami fans for the most part. With Florida, it's a lot more complicated because for all the talk this summer about upgrading the roster, the schedule toughness, the new position coaches on defense, and every other storyline that was at the top of people's news feed since last Thanksgiving, you lose this game, and overnight, the dominant topic in the land of Gator football becomes Billy Napier's job security, which already may have been the case. But now everything else is thrown to the side because whether or not you're in favor or against firing him, that is going to be a conversation point for the entirety of the fan base. You can no longer ignore it. And if you look at this game under a microscope and you play well, in theory, this or that or XYZ could happen. Yes, of course, Florida could, in theory, lose this game and win out or finish 10-2 or even 9-3, which I think even the grumpiest of Gator fans would concede is a pretty freaking good season. Yes, in theory, you can lose this game and still have a very good season. In reality, we're talking about factoring in logic and common sense and Vegas odds and the schedule ahead. In practicality, I don't think it works that Napier can lose this game and ultimately survive. I don't know that the path that is ahead of him, I do think a path exists. I don't think the path ahead of him to survive if he loses this game is a tenable one.
Yeah,
That's where we are.
and to your point, Miami after this game, they play Florida A&M, Ball State, USF before they open with ACC play against an unranked opponent. The Gators get some reprieve in playing Samford in week 2, but then once again at home, another showdown with a top 20 team in the preseason polls, Texas A&M, and they play 8 opponents this season or 7 after the Miami game that are preseason ranked in the top 25. So it doesn't get better for the Gators. It certainly will get better for the Canes. So if they lose this game, there is a conceivable path for them to actually go 11-1 because their schedule is much weaker compared to the Gators. But just I think looking at this, it's put up or shut up time for Billy Napier. It's put up or shut up time. You have now built this roster in your image. You said at SEC Media Days that this is your roster. We finally have depth. We finally are able to go 2, 3 deep at certain positions. We are comfortable with the guys in the room. We think the culture is finally in place. The excuses are gone. You have to finally win on the field. You have to win these matchups. You have a showdown in your opener against the Hurricanes at home. Last year, you didn't have that luxury. You had to fly halfway across the country out to Salt Lake City, Utah, and take on the Utah Utes in a rematch of a dramatic game the year before in the Swamp. This time, it's on your home turf. You start your first 3 games at home. You play 7 home games in the Swamp this year. You have to win, I would say, the majority of them to have a successful season. And it starts with this one because if you cannot win this one, like you said, it is an uphill battle from there.
And I also want to point out the fact that because every time Florida loses a game, it feels like there is a portion of the fan base that goes fire, insert coach name here, and then the rest of the fan base and the media people all come in and they go, "You're being knee jerk, you're being too emotional, you can't think that way." Here's why this is different. Let's just put this in perspective for what happens if Florida loses this game. The first thing and the most granted, the most emotional and the least rational is Florida drops to 1-8 against their rivals. Now, that is a pretty terrible statistic. It also doesn't account for the fact that Georgia is the sports dominant superpower. FSU was a very good team, and some argue would be in the college football playoff or would have been if they had their starting quarterback last year. So you're talking about, well, Three of those eight losses right there are to CFP teams. A fourth was to the Heisman Trophy winner. A fifth was to the Heisman Trophy winner before he became the Heisman Trophy winner in Jaden Daniels in 22, also with two first round NFL draft picks at receiver. So you can say, all right, that is a horrendous statistic. But you look at the teams that they played, roll your eyes, groan, grunt. Okay, you can understand that. Fair enough. They're all really good, and that's not Napier's fault. But then you get deeper into the statistics, and here's a good one. Napier, obviously at 0-1, would be in big trouble of having a third straight losing season. Do you know, Chris, the last time that a Florida Gator coach began his tenure with three straight losing seasons?
It's not probably the 1940s.
1936 to
Okay.
1938. And for those of you who are history buffs out there, this was before Nazi Germany invaded Poland. That means that this was before the start of World War II. Was the last time that a Florida coach began his tenure with three losing seasons in a row. You lose this game, and that's not a guarantee, of course. As I said earlier, yes, in theory, hypothetically, yes, the Gators could bounce back. But then you look, you only talked about the front few games of the schedule, Chris. How about the back half where you have to go to Texas, Georgia, Ole Miss is going to be good. You know, LSU is going to have talent. FSU on the road. I know they lost to Georgia Tech, but that's still a rivalry game. That's no guarantee at Tennessee, on et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You lose that first game, and that's in real jeopardy too. So now you have a historical precedent that you really don't want to set, and Napier is in danger of being the guy to set it. And then you have all kinds of miscellaneous facts, like he'll be 11-15 overall as the Florida coach. He'll be 7-15 as the Florida coach against Power Four / Power Five opponents. Think about that. He loses this game, he will have less than 1/3 of his games that he's coached against Power Four, Power Five opponents be wins. He will have won fewer than a third of his games against the major opponents that he's supposed to beat. And all you have to do is go back in time 10, 15 years. Look at Urban Meyer's statistics in that case. And I know Urban Meyer is one of the greatest coaches ever. Well, some say you're comparing Billy Napier to one of the GOATs. That's not fair. But then you get into
That's the standard at Florida.
that's if you're not striving, right. If you're not
That's the
striving for
standard
that,
at the University of Florida is
that's right.
championships. It's the
And
years on the orange walls that we is the barometer for how we compare teams of the past, present, and future. And if you're not getting the job done, then it's a different conversation.
And if you're
And
not going for that, if you're not striving for that, then what are you doing? Why
right.
are you even trying?
And look, I do think Napier ultimately, I know Napier is a competitor. I don't think Napier likes the fact that he has those records since his tenure has begun here at Florida. But this is the opportunity to flip the script. It's turn the page. This is your team now. The majority of the roster are your players. You recruited them. You got them through the portal. The majority of the team are your starters from the 22 deep and down into the second and third deep of the team. This is your team now. So everything is on you at this point forward. There's no more excuses. They're out the door. You've got to win games. Like you said, Neil, so forget the schedule. You got to win games. It's a bottom line league at the end of the day. It's wins and losses. You have to perform. You have to win. So looking at this matchup though, overall, Florida, like I mentioned, does open at home. And this is actually the third time in a row we are opening with a ranked opponent. Of course, Florida split that series against Utah. We all know what happened in those two matchups. Going into this is the 57th rendition of the rivalry. Florida and Miami used to play quite frequently, almost on an annual basis in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. That did end in the 1990s as the rivalry was discontinued. It was revived in the 2000s, where we did have three matchups. Of course, two of those were or actually four, because we played in the Peach Bowl in 2004.
Well, so
But
yeah,
the
there were two home and homes, oh
two
02,
home
oh
and
03,
yeah,
and then 08 and 13, and then
yeah,
04 was a Peach Bowl. But yeah, it
correct.
was
So
revived
yes.
intermittently. Yes.
And two of those were during the heyday of the Hurricanes with Larry Coker when the Miami Hurricanes played for two national championships, won one of them in 2001 with Ken Dorsey and all of those NFL Hall of Famers that have now come and gone. But this is a matchup now where Miami has the series right now at 29-27. Florida has a chance to continue to close that gap. They've won two of the last three matchups. Of course, the 2019 showdown in Orlando, 24-20, where Felipe Franks pulled it out despite his plethora of turnovers and every chance we had to give that game away. And then that was where if many Gator fans remember the infamous meme that came about where Steve Spurrier grimaced up in the press box after another Felipe Franks interception late in the game that nearly gave the game away. And then, of course, everybody remembers the last time these two teams met in the swamp was in 2008 when the Gators won the national championship, that epic night game. And if you want to do anything with your time this week, just to get you a little bit pumped up, YouTube, and you can go to in all kinds of weather YouTube channel. Neil has the game up there. Just YouTube that game and watch the beginning of when the night crowd is jazzed up. They're ready to run out the tunnel. George Edmondson is still Mr. Two Bits at that time. He does the Mr. Two Bits, and then the team runs out of the tunnel. I get goosebumps thinking about that. That was an incredible night. The Gators thrashed the Hurricanes 26-3 and just an absolute defensive performance by them. They honestly probably should have scored more points on that night. But there's some history here. There's some rivalry. And I know that the Hurricane fans think they're going to walk into an environment where they think they might take over 20% of the stadium, but this is going to be a lot of white and probably some blue in there too, because I don't think all Gator fans
No,
are
there
going to
will
be
not be much
following.
white. Sorry. No,
No,
we're gonna
just a
bunt.
question. So you're going to be wearing blue to the game,
Yeah.
is that right? All right. I've
The
decided
reason I'm
that.
wearing black now is because I'm saving my blue shirt for the game.
Fair enough. I am going to be wearing so if anybody remembers the 1994 Gators polo that they revived a couple of seasons ago with the white shirt, the blue scales, I figure I split that one there. So I'm going to have white and blue. I'm actually going to be wearing this Gators reversible hat to the game as well. So that'll be my white. I'll have my white there, but I'll also have some blue. It's just weird for me to wear the all white polo for this game, or just to any Gator game for that matter. Something about the blue. And we're wearing blue after all. It is a little weird that they are wearing, I don't know what bottoms are going to be wearing, but they're wearing white jerseys in this game. So it's going to be a little weird for us to wear the white. I just didn't like it whenever
That's
they let it out.
that's a PR fumble by Florida's team. I think that they're just trying too hard. I mean, you don't have any traction with this. I would figure at some point you'd kind of wave the, no pun intended, you wave the white flag and just punt on it. Give
Yeah,
up.
I guess some people were saying it's because of the heat index that's going to happen, and they figure like white. But I mean, then why not wear white to every game? Because it's hot
Right.
almost to every first half, home game of the season, basically from August through mid-October. You're boasting a heat index up into the 90s, if not triple digits. So it's just a little odd. But nonetheless, the only thing we can't ask for is that show up, be proud, be loud. We got to make this the most hostile environment like it was back in those matchups in the Hurricanes of the past. All right, Neil, it's time to get into kind of the key players of this matchup. We talked about it a little bit in our preview of the season when we were hinting at what we thought. We're going to go offense and defense. We're going to start with offense here. And obviously, you look at a quarterback like Graham Mertz, who came back for his final season of eligibility in college football, 73% completion percentage last year, almost 3,000 yards passing. He would have had that if he was not hurt in the Missouri game the weekend before the Florida State game. 20 touchdowns to 3 interceptions. Had a remarkable season. A lot of people doubted him coming into last year, but he certainly played incredibly well and has high expectations because of that going into this season. And then, of course, Miami, you look at Cam Ward, a transfer quarterback from Washington State. Before that, from Incarnate Ward. This is a guy that definitely played very well there, but I will say he has never gone into a hostile environment like the Swamp. Yes, he's played at Austin Stadium. Austin Stadium is not Ben Hill Griffin Stadium. It is nearly double the capacity of Ben Hill Griffin or of Austin Stadium. This is going to be an environment that he has never played in before. And I do want to bring up a stat that I thought was pretty staggering. Cam Ward under pressure in road environments in the Pac-12 had a 47% completion percentage in those moments. And I got to think that the Gators are going to get back there at times. They're going to get there. The crowd is going to be in this game, similar to it was maybe in like that Tennessee matchup last year, the Utah matchup in 2022. If that happens, that is, I think, the key there for a recipe for disaster for Cam Ward to make mistakes, turn the ball over. And I will also note he has thrown an interception before to Tre'Quezie Bridges, who transferred to Florida this past season while he played against Oregon, and Oregon did win that matchup. So looking at the offense, though, that I mean, I just talked about the quarterbacks. Obviously, running backs, you've got Montreal Johnson Jr., questionable for the game. We do not know if he's going to go. He has been practicing, but Trayon Webb has been taking the first team reps now for the majority of camp since the injury. We'll see if he's able to go. I think the biggest thing we're going to be missing there, possibly, though, Neil, is the pass blocking ability of Montreal Johnson Jr. against a pass rush when you have guys like Ruben Bain on the other side coming at Florida. And many people are saying they said the same thing about Florida State, but they're saying it about Miami. They have one of the best defensive lines, not just in the ACC, but in all of America. So they're going to definitely need to have that ability so Graham Mertz is able to get the ball to all of his receivers. In the wide receiver position, of course, Chimere Dike, transfer from Wisconsin, Khalil Jackson, starting again for the Gators. Elijah Badger definitely is going to work in the rotation, just not ready to start quite yet. And then, of course, Eugene Wilson the third, one of the best receivers in all of America. I think you probably have the most dynamic playmaker on the field, period, and Trey Wilson. Miami certainly has their guys. Xavier Restrepo is a great receiver in his own right. Jacoby George coming over as well from last season and had a great year. And then Samuel Brown from Houston, who had nearly 1,000 yards over in the American Conference last season. But I don't think anybody really compares to what Trey Wilson did as a freshman and what his ceiling potentially could be as a college football player before it's all said and done. So, Neil, looking at the offense, what are you looking for in these matchups, and I guess, who are the players you're looking at to make an impact on the offensive side for both the Gators and the Hurricanes?
I mean, the cheap answer for me is to go to the conversation we had after the Georgia game last year and talk about the head-to-head recruiting battles that Florida lost and seeing those guys make plays for Georgia, like Jonel Aguero, for example, a guy Florida really wanted, blocked a punt for a safety in that game. So, I mean, for me, it's going to start with Mark Fletcher. That was a guy that Florida had their eyes on for on the recruiting trail. Canes went and they beat the Gators out for him. Samson Okunlola, the pancake honcho. Everybody remembers those memes during his recruitment process. Well, he's got the hype for a reason because he is a big time offensive lineman that can clear quite a lane for Mark Fletcher. I tend to think that Florida's going to have their hands full with him. I know the Gators, I'm sure, I believe the Gators have taken steps forward as a defensive line, like we've talked about all offseason, guys like Joey Slackman, et cetera. And then getting Cam Jackson and Caleb Banks back, getting Kelby Collins and TJ Searcy to step forward in another year in the program. You figure that they'll have their reps that they win, but Okunlola is a 5-star offensive line prospect. He's talented clearly, and he's shown flashes of it so far. So let's see if he can do it consistently against the Gators. And really, those are two of the most important positions in the game. Obviously, Cam Ward, a quarterback, that's you're at the control. So of course that's the most important. But Fletcher as a running back, as a guy who can maybe pick up some blitzes here and there, and then Okunlola is going to be the guy protecting the blind side. So you have to figure that he's going to be a pretty critical piece to their offense too. I really look there. And then for Florida, obviously Trey Wilson, as you said, I'm looking to see the step that Arlis Boardingham takes from year one in the system. I mean, technically he's a junior, but for all intents and purposes, last year was year one for him. So let's just be intellectually honest and say from year one to year two that he takes a big step forward. We've heard good things. I've heard great things about him as a route runner specifically this offseason. Let's see him do it. Let's see him go on the field and do it. Let's see someone else step up, whether that's an Aiden Mizell, whether that's an Andy Jean, whether that's a Jeray Hawkins, TJ Abrams, someone else step up and become another receiver so that Trey Wilson and Boardingham can, not draw double coverage. And then, of course, the offensive line. That's the big concern for me going into the season. The right half of it, or the right 40% of it, the guard and tackle positions. I mean, I've gotten some reports that there have been guys winning some reps at those positions, and then there has been more of a struggle at other times. And that's putting it very, very bluntly. And if they can't block a guy like a Ruben Bain, or an Akeem Macedo, I think is how you or Macedo or is how you pronounce it, the guy who came over from West Virginia, who's been battling some injuries, but they think he's going to be ready to go for this game. You can't block their front seven, you're going to have a long day because unlike Cam Ward, I mean, Mertz is a tough guy, but he's not able to run away from it. So you're going to have to see someone step up on the right side of the offensive line and give Mertz at least a fighting chance to go through his progressions.
Yeah, we'll see. The right side of the line is my biggest concern as well. And, Damian George, Brandon Crenshaw Dixon do appear that they are poised to start at the right guard and right tackle position. George, of course, sliding over to the guard position, which some are saying are his more natural position all of his time, but finally gets an opportunity to showcase his skills there. I'm looking to see if a guy like Rod Kearney maybe though does crack that right guard spot in this game, or if just maybe later in the season. But if he's struggling, I do not think that they're going to wait to pull the trigger. Napier has already shown a willingness to start younger players over more established veteran players. And a guy like Rod Kearney, who you won over an in-state rival in Florida State, who definitely I think would have loved to have had a prize recruit. You talk about winning battles over teams or losing battles over teams. That's a player they probably would have loved to have had because a certain number 67 put some things on tape against Georgia Tech that were not very good at their guard position. And a guy like Rod Kearney, I think, has the potential to be a very good guard in the league and maybe an all conference guard at that. So we'll see.
Wait. Sorry, where did that guy start his career again?
Who's that?
That guard for FSU.
That'd be Richie Leonard. We don't need to dwell on the past. He moved on to greener pastures. We'll leave it at that. Emphasis on the greener. So,
Nice.
I think it, I think you're picking up what I'm putting down. But I think that the right side of the line is the concern. And if Florida is having troubles there, that's going to be not great for Mertz. I don't think Mertz is going to be able to get through his reads, get the ball down the field because I do think this is a game, and we'll get into the keys later on, but Florida, in my opinion, is going to have to throw the football to win this game, to move the ball down the field. I do think it's going to be a little bit of a struggle to run the football against this Miami front seven. And especially if Montrell Johnson isn't able to go. And that's not to say that I know the staff feels very good about the guys they have in that room. Trey Webb, Jaden Baugh, who came in has come in as a freshman and has already lit up the field on the practice field. But I'm looking to see if they're able to move the ball down the field vertically, and are they going to do it in a creative way? We've talked a lot about last year. The route tree has been less than desirable. It has not been good. They've needed to improve that aspect of their offense. Let's see if promoting a guy like Russ Callaway, who now has more purview over the offensive game plan, the offensive play calling, if he's able to make a difference there, and if there's more creativity with this offense this season, we're going to see it in this game. And I just think, Neil, that they're going to have to throw it to win the game. And we'll get into that key later. But because of the deficiencies potentially at the offensive line, you're going to have to probably get some quick passes, some pop passes, some slants, that intermediate game, which Merch does excel at, fortunately. That's what's going to move the ball down the field with the guys that they have.
Well, it's going to move the ball down the field as long as Miami doesn't sell out to stop exactly that. I mean, you saw some teams do that last year, and it got troublesome for Florida at various points. Now, there is something to say about a guy like Trey Wilson or an Arlis Boardingham just being a better athlete and being able to make more plays. Or last year, Ricky Pearsall, who we don't have anymore. But I mean, I guess this year you could say Elijah Badger stepping up and making plays, but it limits what you want to do, certainly. And I think that the coaching aspect of the offense is going to come into play here. I mean, we've heard about Russ Callaway being more involved in the offense, having a hand in the play calling. Well, let's see that. Let's see if Florida only has 15 to 20 plays that they call again this year, or if they expand the playbook to maybe a 35 or a 40. But I mean, to me, the key, and I know you were going here again, I know you were going here next, but keys on the other side of the ball to me. When the Miami Hurricanes have the ball, the Florida defense got beat up, embarrassed, struck down, thrown around at times, and in one case featured on the Heisman Trophy reel. That was not a good showing. Really, the last 2 years for Florida. In fact, the last three for Florida. I don't think there's been anyone on this team really the last four. 2020 defense wasn't good. There's not a person on this Florida Gator defense that has ever been a part of a good Florida Gator defense. I'm betting that that fact pisses them off. I'm betting that that's going to make them angry. Now, the question is, do they play better? Well, they have an all new staff. They did pick up some pieces on the defensive side, as you mentioned, Tre'Quavion Bridges. Another big one to me is DJ Douglas. Another big one, Asa Turner, Joey Slackman, Pop Howard at the linebacker position. There are pieces now that have come over from other schools that were not a part of the last couple of years. So they don't have that anger in them, but they also have well, I'm not going to keep transferring every year. I want to go to another school to find a home at another school, not just as another step. Maybe let's make this new place my home and let's show up and show out here because this is a premier program. Let me get my money's worth out of my time in this premier program so they'll have that hunger. And I'm really thinking that between that and the strength and conditioning program, which we talked about ad nauseum all off season long, being a critical piece of this. And now that I think we can look back and say, yeah, I kind of feel good about it. I mean, because you'll never know until you see them take the field. You'll never know until you see how they play in the fourth quarter, if they're getting pancaked, if they have guys with their hands on their hips. You'll never really know. But we feel generally good about the direction that that has taken. So I think between that and the mentality that's been put into these guys' minds through one avenue or another, I think the defense is going to be okay. The question for me is, are they going to be okay in this game? Or is it going to take them a few games to figure things out? Because as we talked about at the top of the show, the Gators don't have a few games to figure things out. You need to win games now. You need to win while the schedule is fairly easy because it's going to become very much not that far down the road. So this is the game where you have to see that the defense has picked things up. Ron Roberts is going to have to show that his impact is felt immediately. Guys who have been going through those tackling drills with their defensive coaches, like we've seen Will Harris with the tackling mat in practice and clips on Twitter. We've seen Gerald Chapman do the same thing. Well, let's see it pay off now because Miami's offensive line is not bad. As we talked about with Okunola, they have five guys, I think, that were all blue chip commits, 4 or 5-star commits on that offensive line that are starting. And they have a running back in Mark Fletcher who can do a lot of damage, not only as a running back, not only as a guy who can catch the ball, he's not a terrible blocker either. So, I mean, he's not an all American as a blocker, but he's not bad. So you're going to have your hands full getting pressure on the quarterback. And after watching the Gators do anything but that on defense last year, that is going to be a big key to the game. I know we haven't gotten quite there yet, but to me, the entire game rides here.
Yeah, no, so yeah, I mean, looking at the defensive side of the ball, I do feel though, and this is more of a general statement about the squads. Florida has more cohesion with them. They're returning 17 starters. A lot of the guys that they've brought in have played together at least 1 to 2 years. You can't say that about Miami. If you look at every position, they've brought in transfers across both sides of the ball. And you got to think that not playing together when you're lined up next to your guy in the trenches, that's got to make a little bit of a difference. It's not that, these guys aren't talented. And it kind of goes back to what Allie Peak said when she came on our show, was that if Florida played this game maybe in November, she'd feel very differently. But because it's the first game of the season, it's at home, and it's a matchup where you've got one team that has played together. They've gone through it all, the gauntlet of the last 2 years, the losing together, the building together, the grinding it out in the offseason to get to this moment. Whereas a lot of these guys from Miami are coming in, they haven't played together. Cam Ward, this is his first game ever as a Miami Hurricane. Miami's looking, and you look at the defensive side of the ball, they're going to start potentially two defensive linemen on the interior from NC State and Michigan State, respectively. Never played together in a game. To me, that experience will play a factor in this game. And why I know I mean, it's not a spoiler. If you've listened to our show before, Neil and I think the Gators are going to win this game. We'll reveal our scores later on, but it's not a mystery as to why that may be because of the fact that they haven't, the experience and the production is just not there for Miami quite yet. Now they have college experience, but not together I think makes a difference here, especially on the defensive side of the ball, where you've got a lot of veterans for Florida that have played some big time ball at other programs. And I do think that this game, I feel much more confident with our defensive line, our linebacker room, especially now. You're looking at a situation now where you have a guy like Shamar James finally healthy back from injury. We saw the difference it made last year not having Shamar James. I think Florida probably wins one, if not two games, if you have him on that back half of the schedule. Missouri comes to mind, certainly Arkansas and potentially Florida State. So I think not him losing him last year, we lost the MVP of our defense. He's back. I think there's an argument that he is the best linebacker on the field when the Gators are out there on defense. Club Howard projecting to start alongside him. And then you got the young bucks, Aaron Childs, Miles Graham. Do they get in this game, or does a veteran like Derek Wingo step up? I do think though that the experience there of some of those guys playing together for the Gators will ring the day. And then on the cornerback room, I'm really excited to see finally the improvement here that Will Harris has made. You talk about a guy like Jason Marshall, it's his last year in the program. He's got to finally make a difference. He's got to finally have the year, put something on film that's respectable to get him drafted and live up to the hype that we've all said that he can live up to. And then a guy like Devin Moore, when he's healthy, is the best cornerback on the team, maybe the best cornerback in this game. He's healthy going in this game. We need him to stay healthy for the season. Obviously, we need to see him stay healthy for this game. But I really like what he could do for us, especially as you have a situation where Miami does have some very talented receivers that they're going to have to guard on the other side. And then I'm really loving the upgrades of the safety room. You mentioned Ace Turner. And then bringing back a sophomore, Jordan Costello, who took his lumps as a freshman, showed some flashes of greatness, was an all-conference freshman by some outlets out there. He returns now to start alongside him. So you're going to have a guy who's got experience playing in a national championship game and a guy who's now gone through the gauntlet of the SEC. Experience, experience, experience. That's the trend. That's the common theme that I'm trying to instill about this defensive side of the ball for the Gators. And I think who are the key players and they're going to make the big difference in this game. So, Neil, it's time to get to our keys to the game. Well, actually, before we do that, we'll get to our who has the advantage. I want to quickly grade out who we think has the advantage when each team has the ball. All right, Neil. So we ran through, like I said, we ran through offense, we ran through defense. Let's look at each position, starting with the quarterback. Who has the advantage?
I think Florida's got the better quarterback when it's all said and done. I think Miami has the more talented natural athlete, but as we saw last year, granted at a different school, but still, Cam Ward can be an absolute turnover machine. Graham Mertz doesn't make mistakes. I mean, one of his, what was it, two or three interceptions last year? One of them was a tip that wasn't his fault. He doesn't turn the ball over. And he also can throw a pretty ball between 5 and 15 yards down the field. It's not like they're all, flares or screens. He can throw a nice ball down some 12-yard out routes. Maybe a 20-yard hitch is asking for, or not a hitch, a 20-yard slant is a little bit too much, or a crossing route is a little bit too much for him. But he can throw pretty much every route on the tree within 15 yards with pretty good accuracy. And that's probably more than you can say about Cam Ward. Now, he can also spin away from tackles. Gator fans are probably going to have that nightmarish replay of Jordan Travis spinning away from everybody in Tallahassee a couple of years ago. He is capable of doing that. Maybe not quite the same exact type of athlete as Travis, but he can make plays similar to that happen if you're not careful. But all things said, Florida's got the better quarterback.
Yeah, I agree. I second that. I think Mertz playing at home with the crowd behind him, with the experience of playing already a year in the system, has an advantage. This is the first game in the system for Ward. It's in a very hostile road environment. Honestly, I don't understand why some people really say Miami has the advantage. I understand Ward has got incredible potential ceiling, but it's potential. We haven't really seen what he's like in this time of big time matchups in this environment, and that's why I think the Gators have the advantage here with Graham Mertz. All right, running back position. I'm going to caveat this. I'm going to say if Montreal Johnson is healthy, I think Florida actually has the slight edge here. But because we're not sure, and you mentioned a guy like Mark Fletcher, I'm going to say Miami has the edge at the running back position. What do you think?
I don't know that it really matters in terms of a what can they do with the ball perspective. I think when you lose Montreal Johnson, you lose a lot of ability in the pass protection category. So, and that's part of it. So, from that angle, I'll probably say Miami, but I will caveat that with Florida. I like the Gators' explosiveness. I like what they have in Jaden Ball. I don't think it's a weakness by any means.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a big delta between the two with an
It's
advantage.
not. It's not.
Receiver. This one's a little interesting because I do think both sides boast talented receivers at both of these positions. Like we mentioned, you have Xavier Restrepo, Jacoby George, Samuel Brown from Miami, and then of course Trey Wilson, Chimere Dike, Khalil Jackson, and Elijah Badger, and potentially an emerging star and maybe an Aiden Mizell. Who knows? But Neil, who do you think has the advantage when it comes to the receiver room?
Miami's receivers are very, very good. Florida's are just better. So not knocking Miami. I know there are a lot of Canes fans who troll watch these shows. I know they're going to jump all over everything I say that's not singing their praises. So don't get this twisted when I say that you guys have a very good receiving core, probably the third or fourth at worst best in the ACC. At worst, the third or fourth. At worst, the third or fourth best in the ACC. Florida's are just better.
Yeah, I agree. I think Florida has a very good receiver. Trey Wilson, like we said, the most dynamic player on the field, period. Period. Best player when the ball's in his hand, you have to game plan around that. And he can make a guy miss, break a guy's ankles. He has that playmaker ability that guys in the past like Kadarius Toney have had, like a Percy Harvin have had.
Well, all right,
That's
let's not
that's
compare.
the kind of, but that's the elite
Yeah.
playmaking ability that he possesses. They're all different in their own right in what they do, but that is the elite playmaking ability that he has. He's a game changer at the end of the
Yes.
day. And those guys were game changers in the same way that Trey Wilson is. And I think that is a huge advantage that Florida has over Miami. All
Fair.
right, tight end room.
I'm going to give this to Florida just based on the fact that they don't have a ninth year senior in their tight end room. They don't have what is it, a 27-year-old man in Cam McCormick.
Yeah, we're starting
Um,
to get to Chris Winkie numbers here.
yeah,
If anybody remembers, Chris Winkie back in the
he's
day was
almost.
a 28-year-old Heisman Trophy winner.
No, I mean Arlis Boardingham is a very good tight end in his own route. As we talked about earlier, we're looking for him to take that step from maybe the B plus level tight end to the A level player, the A plus level player even. No one's going to compare him to Kyle Pitts. He's not that. No one's going to compare him to the guy who murdered people that we're not going to name in terms of pure talent or athleticism. But he's a very good, and for Miami's perspective, a very problematic player. So, and then you have Hayden Hansen, who's very good in his own right. So I'm going to say Florida, probably by a pretty decent margin here.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this is we talked about the last few where maybe the margin for difference wasn't much.
Right.
This one I feel like is actually a pretty wide margin, and at the tight end room is much better. And I do like Arlis Boardingham. I do think he's a talented tight end. Just that size, that mismatch, and the speed that he actually possesses. Former track athlete in high school, and then Hayden Hansen. I mean, the great blocking, hand in the dirt type guys Ben Troop talked about when he was on our show earlier this week. That's a guy that can also really, it's when we have that 12 personnel, you have to account for in different facets of the game. So I think Florida, this is actually where they can sort of maybe exploit some mismatches on the Miami side when they have the ball.
So put it this way,
And
Florida lost Jonathan Odom after this past season. If the Gators had kept Jonathan Odom, they would have the three best tight ends in the game in this game.
I could agree with that. Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And just for the record, I'd have no problem saying Aaron Hernandez's name on this air. I think Aaron Hernandez is one of the best players in school history. It's unfortunate his ending, but Chico, man,
He
we we
did
we,
he did
we got to give
terrible.
him our respects
He
to
did
what he
he
did
did
at Florida.
absolutely horrendous things, but the athlete that he was spectacular.
Absolutely. One of the best tight ends in his school history next to Kyle Pitts, of course. All right, last offensive position group, offensive line. I got to give the edge to Miami here.
Yeah.
And this one might be similar, maybe not as big of a margin as the tight end room where Florida is over Miami, but I do think Miami has recruited very well. And this is in you have a head coach this is his position. He played it in college at the University of Miami, coached it with Nick Saban at Alabama. Alex Mirabel is one of the best offensive line coaches in the business. They've recruited this position exceptionally well, both at the high school and through the portal. Miami has an advantage here.
Yeah, I think that. I would say that maybe two of Florida's offensive linemen would compete for starting jobs at Miami. I think that Austin Barber
Barber
at
and Slaughter.
tackle and Slaughter at center, I think would be in the running for a spot. I don't think that's true for the other three. I think Miami also has the best offensive lineman of the 10 in Samson Okunlola. I think he was good last year. I think he'll take a step to being elite, maybe even this year. And Florida,
Francis Mauigoa,
yeah, well, right, him too.
another guy that we didn't get.
Yeah, but that's another head-to-head battle that Florida lost down the road. But I mean, again, this is one that I personally don't think is that close. I think that Miami has. I don't think Florida's offensive line will be terrible, but the right side does concern me. And Miami's offensive line doesn't seem like it has a particularly weak link, even though some positions are better than others. So Miami definitely gets the nod here.
Yep, agreed. All right, defensive side of the ball. So we'll start with the defensive line. This one, I mean, I know everybody does say Miami has maybe one of the best defensive lines in the ACC in the country, but I do think Florida has some players here on this side. I don't think the gap is as wide as it was for the offensive line. And comparing the two, TJ Searcy returns at the edge position. Cam Jackson returns at the nose tackle. We had him on our show. Please go back and listen to that one if you haven't already. It was a great episode to have him on there. Joey Slackman comes over from UPenn, and then it's Boone time. Boone is back at the strong side defensive end spot. I'm excited to see what this group can do. I do think it has some depth. Took a hit when we lost Jamari Lyons in camp, but still a good group. But of course, Ruben Bain on the other side had a stellar freshman year. Looks to be potentially an All-American, a future NFL pick for the Canes. So, Neil, who do you give the edge to in this position?
I think Miami has the best defensive lineman in the game. I think Florida has the better overall defensive line. Ruben Bain is the best defensive lineman that honestly I think Florida will see until the second half of the season, until you start going up against guys like, in Texas and Georgia. And you can kind of roll out there too deep, and they would be guys that would start at Florida on day one. But I mean, Bain's a problem. I mean, Bain is he can play defensive tackle, he can play edge. He can line up anywhere and he can be productive at any of those spots. So to me, that's a situation where your offensive line is going to be in big trouble if they're not on their P's and Q's, getting all the protections right and pre-snap. But I think Florida has the better overall room because they have more guys that can cause problems, albeit not any one guy that can cause problems like Bain.
Yeah, I like that analysis. I really hadn't thought of it that way, and I think just overall, like that experience coming back, Caleb Banks, Cam Jackson in the interior side, Joey Slackman, a veteran, was the Ivy League defensive player of the year. Justice Boone, who's now ready to show that he's back from that ACL tear, and TJ Searcy. No, he didn't play to the level and put up the numbers that Ruben Bain did, but he still was a menace in some of it in getting to the quarterback last year. And this is the time where you start to see a player like him with his ability make that next jump. Former top 100 recruit in his own right for the Gators when we brought it in the 2023 cycle, made an impact his freshman year. I agree. I think the Gators have a slight edge here at the defensive line room, with the caveat that Ruben Bain is the best player on that side of the ball.
The other thing too, and obviously, like nobody is rooting for injuries because that's terrible. But in theory, Miami is one play away from that going from a slight edge to a seismic one and falling
Right,
off the continental shelf. So
right.
again, that there's zero intention of seeing that happen. But Florida is just deeper. Or maybe it's not injury. Maybe he gets ejected for targeting. Maybe he's sick or something. I don't know. Anything can happen, as we saw with Jamari Lyons. One misstep, one wrong move, a miscommunication could result in a concussion or something, or a targeting or something where it's just that one guy that defines their entire defensive line. I understand that they do have other guys out there, but no one that has proven to be as menacing as Ruben Bain.
Yeah, and the other point I'll make about that too, because if you look at the other two projected starters for Miami's defensive line, they're paratransfers that I alluded to earlier. That's NC State CJ Clark and Simeon Barrow Jr. from Michigan State. Both didn't boast the numbers that Bain did in their careers at NC State and Michigan State, respectively. If you look at their two deep, they got guys like Elijah Alston, who came over from Marshall. He was one of the better Sun Belt players. And certainly Florida's brought over Sun Belt players that panned out in the SEC. But a lot of times when you come from programs like that and they haven't played the competition like you have in the SEC, it's not a one for one. And we'll see if that's the case, of course, for Joey Slackman, to be fair here. But if Florida is able to control the rest of Miami's defensive line on the offensive line side of things, you can sort of key in and sort of the double team a guy like Bain to take the pressure off of the rest of the other line and having to guard those other players because they don't pose as big of a physical matchup as Bain does. So we'll see what the game plan is from Austin Armstrong, but that's something to think about is, you can key in on one player and hopefully exploit the other mismatches you may have along the line of scrimmage.
By the way, Miami's defensive line, again, like I said, they have talent elsewhere. It's just not proven.
Yes,
And
correct.
what I mean, the last thing in the world we want to see is someone else break out against the Gators, which is very possible because, as we know, Mario does recruit talented guys. My statement is just that they don't have anyone that has proven it in
Yep.
games.
Yep. All right, let's move on to the linebacker room. This is I think a room that Florida has upgraded in, is very excited about with the additions of Grace Howard, the freshman, Miles Graham, and Aaron Childs. And then, of course, Shamar James, who's back from injury, like I spoke about earlier. Gators, though, or Hurricanes, though, do have a guy in Wesley uh, Vicente. I can't remember how to say his last name there. That was, and the only reason I bring him up, that was a head-to-head matchup that Miami did win over the Gators. So he is now playing on the other side of it. And Francis Mauigoa's brother, Francisco Mauigoa, the other projected starting linebacker for the Hurricanes. Neil, this is a room where, Francisco Mauigoa was a second team All ACC player last year, 82 tackles, 7.5 sacks, forced two fumbles and an interception. So he had a very good year at the position. But, I think comparatively matches up very well to a guy like Shamar James. And then we all know what Pup Howard did at South Carolina in his freshman year in SEC play, has that experience. I like the Gators linebacker room a little bit more, and I'm excited to see what that depth looks like based on what we've heard in fall camp.
I think that this is another one where the synopsis is similar to those at the receiver position. I think Miami's linebackers are good. I think Florida's are just better. I think that getting Shamar James back is massive. This is a guy who was making plays as a freshman for Florida 2 years ago, and then last year stepped into a bigger role. And if you remember, before things went to hell, Florida's defense was actually pretty good for the first third of the season, minus a couple of plays here and there, but they were getting stops. They were getting the ball back. They were forcing some havoc. I mean, one of the more memorable plays was Des Watson crashing through Tennessee's offensive line and putting a big hit on Joe Milton, which forced a nice like arm punt basically to Devin Moore. This defense does do some big things here, or did do some big things here and there because in part of the linebackers being smart and being assignment sound and not busting and not worrying about what someone else was supposed to do, trusting their teammates and doing their assignment so there's no open hole for opponents to go through. So if they can get back to that, and if Austin Armstrong can get them to take that next step with that creeper defense concept that we love talking about with Derek Wingo and Cam Jackson, I think this linebacker room is going to thrive because as our boy Wingo put it, that's a very creative set of ways to rush for when the offensive line doesn't know it's coming. And if the offensive line thinks that you're rushing seven and you only rush four, they're confused. And even for a split second before they realize, okay, we don't have that much work to do as we once thought, in that split second, you cross all kinds of wires with the offense's route running. So if the linebackers can do that, if nothing else, and make open field tackles and not make any major mistakes, this Florida linebacker room takes a massive step forward. And I think that they're going to have the advantage over a larger amount of teams than maybe we think they will going into the year. So, long story short, for this game, I think Florida's are better.
Yep, I agree. All right, let's move down to cornerback and then we'll get to safety and we will get to our final verdict. So, cornerback, this is one where you've got Jason Marshall returning for his final year, Devin Moore, who we mentioned, potentially the best corner on the field. I do like Florida's matchup here again, and I think that's really just the experience of playing together, that cohesion. They've gone through the lumps of some really bad defenses the last couple of years, but now you have Austin Armstrong there remaking that defense with Ron Roberts. And I'm excited to see the guys that they've also brought in on the back end, like we talked about, Trequezie Bridges, Asa Turner, DJ Douglas, like you mentioned before. I think they'll complement each other in that cornerback room really, really well. And I just think, too, let's talk about Jason Marshall for a second. You got to play for some pride. You got to play for some pride now. It's your final year in a Gator uniform. You came back for a reason, and that was to put good things on film so you could get drafted and you could leave a legacy here at the University of Florida. Something to be proud of to get Florida football back to where it is. You're that five-star athlete. You played high school football down in Miami. There's got to be some pride too to want to beat the guys that you played against in high school, that you recruited against the school, that same school. So coming to Florida, this is the game that this is, if there's a game you want to show out for, it's this one right here. So are you going to be able to take on Xavier Restrepo? Now, this is it. This is the moment. And I think Jason Marshall, Devin Moore rise to the occasion. I like what these guys are able to do, just the length, the speed that they have. And I think that they have the advantage over a guy like a Daryl Porter Jr. or a Deani Hill.
Florida, I think fairly by a fairly wide margin. I won't go out and say that Florida's going to have multiple All-Americans in that room, but I haven't seen anything from Miami secondary as a whole, really corners or safeties, to make me really worry about them. I think Florida's receivers are going to have a pretty massive advantage against them. And I think it's very possible that Miami's receivers will have an advantage over our corners. It just won't be anywhere near as wide of a margin as this is. I think that this is the biggest position versus position matchup disparity that works in the Gators' favor across the field on either side of the ball. So Florida's corners, to me, are significantly ahead of where Miami's are. Unless I could be wrong, but just I haven't seen anything for Miami, and I've at least seen flashes from the Gators.
Yep. Important to note too, the star nickel position. That's where a guy like Sharif Denson, who started toward the end of last year, was a freshman on that team, projected to potentially start in this game, or have a guy like Aaron Gates work in there. I also really do think that room is we finally might have a nickel. I think we went for a long time of like who was the nickel at Florida after we lost Chauncey Gardner to the NFL. I think this is the season where we finally lock in that position and have a guy who's able to take it on, and that's Sharif Denson ultimately. But you do have a guy like Trequezie Bridges who could play there at the nickel star role, as well as DJ Douglas. So I like that room as well for the Gators. I think overall, Florida just in the secondary has just really done a good job of improving this room, and I think they have the advantage at this position as well as at the safety position, which we can get into with Ace Turner and Jordan Castell.
Yeah, I mean this is another sort of prove it in year two of the system moment or year for Florida, where we talked about it with the defensive line with Kelby Collins and TJ Searcy. Well, we have a lot of guys and corner too, corner and safety. The entire secondary were guys like Jakeem Jackson, Jordan Castell, Sharif Denson, all took a lot of lumps last year. Looked pretty bad, to be blunt. They looked awful on some plays where they got fried. Let's take that step forward. Let's put that in the past. Let's learn from it. We have new position coaches now. You have a new strength and conditioning staff. You got bigger. You got stronger. The reports from fall camp, for the most part, have been good. So let's see you do it in a game. And I think that applies. Like, I know we're talking about safety specifically now, but I think that applies to the corners as well as the safety. So safety wise, and go back to the nickel, that's not an easy position to play. It's taken for granted a lot, but whatever you want to call that sort of hybrid position, if you call it nickel, if you call it star, or whatever your defensive scheme or defensive alignment has that position called, that hybrid position that Chauncey Gardner played is not easy to play. It sets a lot of other guys up for failure or success on the defense. So Sharif Denson stepping into that role as a sophomore is not a throwaway diagnosis like, oh, well, he can do some good things, but he sucks at other things. So we don't know where to put him. So this is just us getting him on the field. That's asking a lot of him. So we'll see how it goes. But I'm feeling fairly confident about Florida's safeties taking a step forward this year. And again, I don't have any game tape aside from maybe against a Texas A&M. Well, I mean, even they put up points on them last year. Um, Maybe FSU because they did have a good receiving core, and Miami did limit them a little somewhat in that game. But Miami's secondary hasn't shown it to me against any elite competition. Florida's secondary, specifically now safeties, have shown it against better competition. And before we stop talking about positions, let's see what Cormani McClain can do. And I don't even know where he's going to line up. Like, I don't know where the hole is going to be for him.
I don't know if I anticipate him having an impact in this game or much this season, quite
Not in
frankly.
this game, not or not yet. All right, so not in this game, but we are going position by position now. I want to see him make a play somewhere, whether it's on special teams, whether it's him filling in some kind of cover four or just something. I'm rooting for him to make a play here and there. I know he won't be a fixture in the game. I realize that, but I'm looking forward to seeing him maybe step in on a five cornerback package and seeing him do something, or a five DB package and doing something.
We'll see. It would certainly would make for good storylines in this one, considering the recruitment battle that was that one in 2022. We remember that vividly. All right. Well, that about does it for our preview of all the positions. We hope you enjoyed that. We'll keep doing that segment throughout this year as we preview teams throughout the whole season. But now it is time for the final verdict. So, Neil, let's get our keys to the game, our percentage chance we think that Florida has to win, and a final score prediction. And just so you know, just so we can do it, let's write our score down on a piece of paper. And that way we have it in case we have the same score. I just want to make sure that we are we normally do this thing just because it's uncanny how close we are sometimes. You don't have to show it to me right away, but we'll show it.
All right, all right, we're doing score predictions first.
Well, we'll do it last. We'll end
Okay.
it. So,
Well,
all
we
right.
can do keys.
So yeah, keys to the game.
Okay. I'll say the first key for Florida is block on the right side of the offensive line slash don't let Ruben Bain destroy your game plan. I think that's a pretty common fear from a lot of Gator fans that Bain will cause problems and that the right side of the offensive line just isn't very good, for lack of a better way to put it. So I think at least holding that to a point of neutral would be big and not letting that lose the game. I think on the other side of the ball, it's just feed Trey Wilson. Get him the football. Don't be shy about it like they were against Arkansas last year. Get him the ball however you can. It's like with Percy Harvin or Kadarius Toney, to reference your comparison. Not that I think he is either of those guys, but he is another type of player that, to your point, put the football in his hands and let him do what he does. And then the third key for me, we'll limit ourselves to just three keys. Special teams. Don't lose the game. Count to 11. Don't get anything blocked. And anything fundamental, like put the hold down. Don't line up with 13 guys or two guys with the same
Same
jersey.
jersey.
Yeah, I mean, the things that you wouldn't even think about talking about on a pregame show like this, each of those things has lost Florida a game at some point. Don't catch punts in your own end zone. A guy that we talked about, Jason Marshall, did that. So just don't lose the game on special teams. Miami, in fact, the last time we played, Miami lost it on special teams with Jeff Thomas muffing a punt. So
Yeah.
don't you be the team to do that. And now I'll write my score down.
I remember that vividly. And this will also be the game where the new special teams mat will make its debut on the sideline. I will look forward to seeing that put into practice. I'll be watching pretty intently from the stands this Saturday. So my keys to the game are this. My first big one is obviously you got to control the line of scrimmage. You got to control the line of scrimmage ultimately. We've talked about how Miami has an advantage on the offensive line. So do not give up. Do not let Graham Mertz be running for his life, giving up tons of sacks. You got to give him time to get the ball to his playmaker. So that's the first one. And then on the other side, of course, in the line of scrimmage, we got to make Cam Ward feel uncomfortable back there. I mentioned that 47% completion percentage when he's under duress. We got to get him under duress so he can potentially make mistakes and turn this game on its head and get the swamp into it. The second key, who can make the big play? How many explosive plays will Florida have, and how many can they limit from the Miami side of the ball? Go back to the 2019 Auburn game for a moment. Think about the biggest moments in that game. If you were in the stadium, the Freddie Swain slant pass that went for a touchdown, the Michael Pirine touchdown to cap off the game at the end, the interception by Sean Davis down the sideline, explosive big plays that get the crowd into the game at big and key moments. If Florida's able to get at least 5 to 6 explosives throughout the game, maybe some of that go for that long touchdown run, gets the crowd into it. And when the crowd is into the game, Florida has the advantage. If Miami hits big plays and silences the crowd, out of it. And then my final prediction of the game is it's going to be, can this defense grow up and get off the field on third down? We said it so many times last year. Can you get off on third down? And they didn't do it. Are they able to do that this year? That's how I'm going to know if this defense is different. How many three and outs can we get in this game? Are we able to stop drives before they become bigger? And that for me is going to be a massive key this entire season. So that we'll be able to kind of track it as maybe a padlock or a barometer for Florida's win total this year. But what is our third down success rate on defense? So that's my third and final key of the game. So, Neil, it is prediction time. Obviously, you and I have both picked Florida to win this game. So, percentage chance to win, if you remember what we did in the state of the program address, I think we were somewhere between 55 and 62%. I don't know if you remember that off the top of your
We can
head.
change it now because that was technically a preseason show. This is an in-week show.
Fair enough. All right. So, what is your percentage chance and then your
So
score prediction?
I will say my percentage chance for Florida is right at 60. I think it's a three-fifths, right at there. I think 3 out of 5 times. I think Florida wins this game. Um, I think that Florida being hit home is a huge deal. I think if this game were in Miami, it would be 50-50, not just because, it's a Miami home game, which doesn't really mean anything. It's because it's not a Florida home game, which is a bigger deal than it being a road game per se. So I'll put it right at 60. And then you give your percentage, and then we can each hold up our boards.
All right. So I have a 58% chance that the Gators win this game. I think that was what I said in the previous show, and I'm with you on that. I do think this is just a very tight game. Of course, Vegas spread right now is holding steady. Miami -2.5. The Gators in the last 10 years have covered the spread as a home underdog 8 out of 11 times, winning 6 of those matchups upright. 53.5 is the over under in this game. All right, Neil. Final score prediction from you. What do you got?
Let's do it.
Woo! 31-27. I don't know if all the lights kind of show
Uh,
31-24 for me.
okay.
Unbelievable. I
Pretty
thought
close.
about that score actually earlier in the week, but I went with 31-24.
I think it is a game that scares the bejesus out of Florida fans. I think it is one of those like maybe like a Utah, although Utah Florida was a decided underdog. This one, even though Miami's a favorite, I think a lot of Gator fans are thinking Florida wins. So I would say maybe this feels a little bit a like a South Carolina in '06, with the caveat that there's obviously a lot lower stakes attached to this game than that one did. But if you were to take out the national championship implications, like just the game flow, the way that the game progresses, with albeit with a little bit more scoring, but that Florida fans are scared throughout the course of the game. But I think the Gators do pull it out in the end.
I think this game is one where Florida actually does score early. I think they score first. I think they take a 7-0 lead. I could see Miami getting maybe like a field goal, make it 7-3. And then it's kind of back and forth from there in the scoring department. But I think it's a game that Florida leads for the majority of it. And I think they hang on at the end of the game and get the win. I think the key, like I mentioned, is the third down stops, or even maybe the fourth down stops at the end of the game to win it. And I think that's how it plays out for me. So I mean, I think the whole way it's going to be tight. It's going to be nerve wracking. The crowd is going to have to be into it. I think that's ultimately did the difference in this game. And I also just think the emotion going into this rivalry game where everybody out there in the media says the Gators are not going to have a great season. Billy Napier's going to get fired. I think these guys have something to prove. I just you gotta you're when your manhood is challenged as a football team, you gotta rise up
Your
eventually and get
livelihood
the
is
job done.
challenged. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's just but people are basically calling you out and saying you're inferior to everybody else that you play out there. This
Yeah.
is the time when you shut those people up. And it starts with a win on Saturday. And if you get this win, you conceivably could be a top 25 team when the rankings come out next week. You beat Sanford and you roll in to the Texas A&M game as the ranked opponent. And maybe that line, which right now A&M is about a 4-point favorite, flips the other direction and goes to Florida. If especially if A&M loses their opener to Notre Dame. So
I'll tell you this
I think
too.
the
If Florida and A&M both start 2-0, that day for the A&M
yeah,
game, Swamp is going to be electric.
it will be. Absolutely.
Maybe even more so than this one, which is I know a hard sell because this is an opener and it's a rivalry. But for the SEC opener, if you're 2-0 and you're feeling good, that could be one of the loudest moments in the Swamp in recent.
Reminiscent of the SEC openers when it was Tennessee, not Texas
Yeah,
A&M. But
right.
well, Neil, that this was a great show. I'm really excited to see you, see Chris Phillips down or up in Gainesville
For me,
this
it's down.
Saturday.
Yeah.
We'll be for you down, me up, coming from Tampa. We'll be there bright and early, tailgating near the stadium. So if you see Neil and I, please come say hi. Let us know what your thoughts are on the show and all the content we've been bringing you. If you've been watching this on YouTube, make sure that you hit that like button, that subscribe button down below. Leave us a comment of your score prediction and how you think this game plays out. And of course, please leave us a 5-star review on all the audio platforms.
And also before we call it a show, got to shout out our boy Ben Shelton, Gator
Hmm.
tennis star, winning his opener at the U.S. Open. That was a lot of fun to be at. Ben Shelton did sort of sneak in a couple of Gator chomps as he was walking over to the Sky Sports interview booth. So cool to see the Gator chomp and the Gator Nation being represented at the U.S. Open. Very, very cool stuff.
Yeah, no, definitely. We wish Ben the best of luck. The rest of his run through the U.S. Open, we'll be rooting for him all the way and hope he has a similar run like he did last year. So, from all of us here at the In All Kinds Weather Forecast, we're excited to finally kick off the season against the Miami Hurricanes in the Swamp this Saturday. Go Gators. We'll see you Saturday in the afternoon in the Swamp.